Today we're going to be looking at Godbound, a game of divine heroes by Kevin Crawford. Kevin Crawford has produced a lot of really fantastic old school role-playing games, the most famous of which is probably Stars Without Number. So if you've seen or know about that game, you'll know what to expect with this one. So Godbound is a game in which you take on the role of demigods, extremely powerful characters creating vast changes within the world. I got this off of DriveThruRPG. This is the premium hardback version. It's very well constructed. It's very solid. I haven't seen any cracking or pages that are loose. The page quality is also very high. These pages are thick, they're heavy, there isn't really any bleed through or see through. Easy to tell what is going on. The layout is very clean, very simple. There was some good art in it, though the art is fairly sparse and is very colorful, although I'm not sure if it has a really coherent artistic style. A lot of it is very well done. So let's look at what we do in Godbound. In Godbound, you drive back creatures of the night, defend your people, forge agreements, build wonders, rule nations, or do whatever you want. It's definitely a very sandbox game. Although typical of Kevin Crawford's games, he gives you a ton of tools and advice for running sandbox games. Although it is a very old school game in the sense that the focus is on solving problems and having fairly minimal rules and allowing for a lot of GM arbitration, it is different from old school games in that your characters are obviously very powerful. So they're going to be able to quickly deal with a lot of problems that would cause low-level parties in other games a lot of problems. As a result, you're going to be dealing with issues on a much grander scale right away. So if that appeals to you, then this could definitely be a game to check out. Great example of some art that I really like there. So creating your hero. This is a great example of page layout, which I see all throughout this book, where I see a strong focus being put on keeping all of the information on one or two pages. So there's not a lot of page flipping. There isn't a lot of information being spread out that you have to reference. Everything is compact and easy to reference right there in front of you. A typical Godbound character sheet looks like this. I'll focus on the things that are really different. A lot of things are the same, like the attributes are pretty much the same as in D&D. You have some saving throws. Something you might notice here is you have words. Words being the domains of, or the elements or the themes that your Godbound focuses on. Right? So it makes them what they are. Are they a Godbound of the night and of bows? Are they focus on beasts and forests? The different words give them their powers and their theme. There's a huge variety of these that allow you to really get creative with how you want your Godbound to act. Determining facts. This is very interesting. Your Godbound should have a fact about your origins, your past profession, and some organization that you're connected to. This is very similar. In fact, it's virtually identical to what we see in White Hack. So I'm very happy to see that that style and those rules are being used in other games. I'm not sure if this was, in fact, derived from White Hack, but it's wonderful nevertheless. Allows your character to have a lot of roots in the setting itself. And if you do actions that correspond to one of these facts, then you get bonuses. You choose words. Here's the different words, which are domains, essentially, that your Godbound are going to focus on. There's a wide variety of them. You have wealth and equipment. You have armor. Armor is descending, as we see in a lot of Kevin Crawford's games. But how it works is that your armor is added to your opponent's roll when they try and hit you. So the lower your armor class is, the less advantage they have when they try and hit you. It's a great way of rationalizing descending armor class. Example character creation, rules of the game. There's a strong focus in here of knowing what the players need to know. He knows that most of his audience are going to be from old school games, so he's clear about here's what's the same, here's what's different, here's what to watch out for. Rules for advancement, which are much more about overcoming powerful challenges rather than collecting gold. Collecting gold is not a big deal when you're a demigod, so that makes sense. Combat rounds, very similar to D&D. The big thing I think that's different here is the way that damage works. So there's two types of foes. You can have worthy foes and lesser foes. A lesser foe is someone whose level is equal to yours or lower, and worthy foes are of a higher level. And damage works differently depending on who you're fighting. So when you roll a damage die for a hit, you look here and then you see how much damage it corresponds to over here. You don't the number on the die isn't necessarily the actual damage that you're dealing. You have to look over here. And if you're dealing with a worthy foe, that's how much damage they take to their hit points. However, if you're dealing with a lesser foe, this is how many hit dice they lose. This allows Godbound to quickly dispatch lower leveled creatures. And it allows them to focus and put their energy on dealing with the really powerful monsters and beings that as a demigod, you're going to want to deal with. I think it's a very elegant solution to that problem and allows you to easily import monsters from other old school games without really having to tweak them. You have Fray Dice, which is a 1d8 that you roll that just automatically damages lower level creatures in your area. Divine Fury, when you get knocked out, you have a burst of divine energy that you can attack with. And we have a wonderful quick rule reference here. All of the main rules for attacking and running the game all on one page that you can copy and give out to your players. That's really paying attention to what GMs need. So, divine powers. Here's where things get interesting. You have effort, which is a resource you spend to power your miracles. And miracles are simply, they're more freeform effects that are based on the words that you have or your divine domains. And they're more freeform. They have to apply to your domains and they have to make sense within the fiction. The game master has to give a proper effort cost for them. But fortunately, there's very clear guidelines for how to do miracles. Beyond miracles, what you're mostly going to be using are gifts. So gifts are, here's an example. If you have the word of bow, it means you're a bow hero, like maybe Artemis in Greek mythology. You're going to have very specific powers that you can use. And using these are far more efficient uses of your effort than doing miracles. However, they're more limited. And you can get more and more of them as the game goes on. There's a lot of rules for customizing your words and for really building a demigod that appeals to you and fits the flavor that you want. Having miracles instead of just using gifts allows you to not be constrained by specific powers, but to manifest your domains in the world in a more freeform way, which allows you to feel more like a demigod, which is a smart idea. We have rules for magic and spellcasting, although this isn't so much for the PCs as it is for NPCs, I think. Because it's magic, but it's much less powerful than the gifts that you're going to be using. We have Theurgy, which is a much more powerful level of magic, though still not quite up to the level of the gifts that Godbound have. And it's some more similar to the level of spells that you would see in your typical D&D games. And there's quite a few of these that you could easily import into other old school games. Or you can import typical D&D spells into this without too much trouble. We have a gazetteer of the whole region. And of course, you could use any setting that you wanted to run this, although there is a nice one presented here. This would be a good book to use for a interplanar adventure game. If you're going to be traveling from one world to another, this has a lot of stuff built in that helps that out. It assumes that the universe has been shattered by the war against heaven, when human beings invaded heaven, broke down its walls, and found that the divine throne was empty, and now the universe is in chaos. You can travel outside of the world and visit the shards of heaven, the pieces of hell, or other mortal realms. So you could easily use other D&D universes for that. So we have more information about this particular world called Arsem. We have a player's guide to the realm. Again, one page. You could print this out, give it to your players, and they would have a great summary of everything they needed to know. And now we get to a part that's very interesting, and that's running the world. So Kevin Crawford, man, he just gives you so many tools. He helps you in any way that he can to make your game easier. Gives you the basics of how to run sandboxes, how to set up campaign, really clear, specific advice that's easy to remember and apply. building game sessions, putting things together, how to advance your characters, creating courts, which are essentially factions, packed with random tables. So what is the mood of the court? What are major and minor actors, power sources, conflicts, consequences of its destruction? This is a big deal because your characters, being so powerful, are going to tend to want to wipe out factions that get in their way. And they can do that. It wouldn't be too difficult for a Godbound. But the main thing that this book focuses on are what are the consequences of power? What happens when you use your godlike power to effect huge changes? What are you going to have to deal with as a result of that? And all of the consequences for destruction for all of these types of factions really bring that home. Building an example court, creating dungeons. What was the original purpose of the dungeon? What are hazards in the dungeon? What are rewards if you loot the dungeon? Inhabitants, their goals, their leadership types, their internal problems, recent events, external relationships. All of your factions and your monsters are going to feel alive because they will have all of these little details connecting them to the world and to each other. There are multiple campaigns worth of information here to loot. I would certainly steal these, and I have stolen these from my home campaign. Creating challenges, building structures, clearing ruins, changing customs, convincing people. There's always twists that you can throw at the players to make things more interesting, so they can't just bludgeon their way through every problem. Because that's the biggest challenge, is when your players are so powerful, how do you make things interesting? And this book deals with that and gives you specific advice for doing it. How to change the world, because your players will want to change the world. The limits of change, opposing their changes, modifying creatures, creating cults. Because as your Godbound rises in level, eventually there's going to be cults that are formed to worship them. And these cults give them their prayers, and these prayers can fuel you even more to effect greater and greater changes in the world. So how do you deal with your cults? Factions, nations, and organizations. So similar to his other games, he has rules and sort of like a little mini game that you can use to figure out what's happening in the background. How are these factions interacting with each other when the players aren't looking? Faction problems. More problems than you're ever going to use. Foes of Heaven, we have a bestiary. And a great thing about this bestiary, every monster has a table of tactics. Every monster acts differently, they think differently, they fight differently, and it gives you a whole bunch of things that are unique to them that allow the monster to feel distinct when you fight it, right? It's going to act different. You're going to have to learn its weaknesses, learn its patterns. Why doesn't every game give you stuff like that? Dealing with mobs can be a problem. Individual humans, not a big deal for demigods, but mobs is another issue. So rules for how to deal with that. Parasite gods, relics, shapeshifters, spirits, summoned entities, the uncreated, the undead, all with tables of tactics and lots of other specific things that you can use. How to create new foes, with tons of tables of things that you can combine to make a monster that feels unique and challenging for a Godbound. How to manage combat, how to hand out treasures, distinct things about them to make them unique. Artifacts. Artifacts don't have pluses. These aren't +1, -1 artifacts. These do strange, unique things that you're going to have to be creative with to use effectively. Lesser magical items, celestial engines, wards, etc. So what I'd like to pause here and point out is that the first half of this book, well, it's more than half, it's the first 186 pages, are free. Let me repeat that. They're free. You can go onto DriveThruRPG and download the PDF of that right now. It will not cost you a penny. Kevin Crawford does that for all of his books. It's incredibly remarkable and generous of him. This last section at the back here covers a bunch of extra stuff as a reward for buying the physical book. But all of the basic material, basic information that you need, it's all free, as long as you don't want a physical version of it. So if you haven't done so already, go to the link, download it, you will use it. It's amazing. So the extra stuff at the end includes creating mortal heroes, cybernetics and clockwork if you want a more mechanical or industrial feel to your world, divine supremacy, what happens when your character actually becomes a god? How do you deal with that? God walkers, sacred armatures, martial stripes, which I think are schools of combat, how to create your own paradise, theming your Godbound, proteans, shape-shifting, the undestined, converting powers from other games, and of course all the patrons who support him and who backed it on Kickstarter. So there we go. This was a relatively quick review. I did a longer one, but my camera actually ran out of information and I had to reshoot it because I was just going on and on about this book. But hopefully this gives you a taste of what makes this so interesting and so unique. It's a book that cares about you as a game master being able to run this. And it is willing to give you however many tools you need to make that easy for you. That attitude towards writing role-playing games is remarkable and it's increasingly rare. And I think this book is worth supporting just for that. And it's also worth supporting because you can loot it for stuff that you will use for years. So go down below into the description, check it out, download it, you're going to use it. Godbound is a remarkable book, and I'm going to be definitely checking out other stuff by Kevin Crawford because I want to see what he has to offer. I'm sure it's as good as this. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And leave a comment below if you have played Godbound or other Kevin Crawford books and leave your experiences. I've been very impressed by it. I want to hear what other people have to say. You can support me on Patreon. You can check out my other videos. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys later.